There are so many misconceptions on concussions, even still today. And today we're going to tackle some of those misconceptions, what to do about them, concussion symptoms, and share some of my personal experience dealing with a lot of concussions over the years. So it's going to be a great episode, I hope, and informative and encouraging. If you have just gotten a concussion, I'm glad you're here. You're in the right place. And if one of your loved ones has a concussion, I'm so glad you're here. First of all, don't freak out. We can do this together. And if you've been walking with brain injuries and concussions for a long time, I'm glad that you're here as well. We are not alone on the journey. So let's get started. There is always hope, and you are not alone. Hi, I'm Cristabelle Braden, and this is my brain injury podcast, Hope Survives. Here we share information, education, and support for the brain injury community. This is an uplifting podcast to bring hope to your darkest days. As a survivor of traumatic brain injury and multiple concussions, I know what it's like to struggle to find hope. I don't want anyone to feel as alone as I did, and that's why I started my online community called Hope After Head Injury. This podcast is an extension of that, and I'd love to invite you to join along as we explore the realities of life with brain injury, with messages of encouragement, interviews with doctors and professionals, and survivor stories. No matter where you're at on your journey, there is always hope. With a little hope, you can make it through today. With a little faith, someday you'll get through the pain. Just a little love is enough to light the way through your darkest night. Hope survives. Hope survives. Hey everyone, welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. Today's episode is all about concussions, and this was partially inspired by National Concussion Awareness Day, which this year is September 20th, but it's usually sometime in September. And for Awareness Day, I wanted to get out some concussion awareness. It was also inspired by this past weekend. I had a conversation with a woman who I met at a women's retreat. So I'm a worship leader, as some of you might know. I'm a singer-songwriter. I started writing music after my brain injury, going through my recovery. I started to write songs and play guitar, and music has been a huge healing part of my journey. So I was at a beautiful retreat center in the Poconos and mountains in Pennsylvania this past weekend, leading worship. And I met a woman who was so kind, and she came and talked to me afterwards about her daughter who had just had a concussion. And I found out that not only did she not get her diagnosis right away, when she did end up at urgent care, they basically just said, "You have a mild concussion, go home and rest." And she wasn't sure what to do. And she said, "Should we see a neurologist?" She thought maybe that was the route. And I was able, by the Lord's grace, thankfully, to talk to her and be able to explain that neurologists are not necessarily the right doctor for a concussion, which if you've been listening to this podcast a while, you know that. If you're new, welcome. My recommendation is a concussion specialist, somebody who specializes specifically in concussion rehab. Maybe a physical therapist, maybe a functional neurologist, maybe a physiatrist, depending on their level of experience and if they're up on current research. My number one thing is you got to make sure you see a practitioner that's up on current research. Anyway, most neurologists will just give you medication and send you home. You'll wait forever for the appointment. So I'm getting a little sidetracked. But besides that, I was disheartened to hear about this experience because I talk a lot on this podcast about how we are doing so much better here in 2024 with concussions. We have so much more information. We have so much more resources. We have so much more research that has happened. And the concussion protocol is no longer go home and rest. The concussion protocol has actually changed. You should do 48 hours of rest, I believe it is, and then activity as tolerated by symptoms, light activity, get yourself back into it. You should not just rest nonstop in a dark room forever until you feel better, because it's been shown now that that actually causes prolonged symptoms. Anyway, I was discouraged to hear that they had been told the old protocol and that they had no plan for moving forward after their urgent care visit. And so that partially inspired this. And if that mother is listening to this podcast, because I did give you my podcast info, I hope you don't mind me sharing that. And I'm so glad that, we met and that I was able to say, hey, concussions, yeah, you can't see them on the outside. They could cause other things. There could be some symptoms. Here's some symptoms to look out for, things like that, and to try and find a concussion clinic. So, anyway, we talk a lot on this podcast about how there is hope and how the research has changed. The research has grown. It's just improved over time. And we have so much more information on concussions, but there is still a lot of the world that doesn't know these things and that has these misconceptions about concussions. And so, concussion is a form of traumatic brain injury. The other thing is, they were told at the urgent care she has a mild concussion. And so the mom said, well, she just has a mild one. And it's hard to explain, but mild is just a medical classification based on how long you've lost consciousness or not. It has nothing to do with the symptoms or the effects. So, what is considered a medically classified mild traumatic brain injury or concussion by definition is a mild TBI. But what could be considered, medically classified as mild is not going to have a mild effect on the person's life. In fact, mild, quote unquote, mild concussions can be devastating to somebody's life, especially if they don't get treatment, if they don't know, how to move forward or what they're doing. And so I had my first brain injury in December 2007. And at the time, we were told it's a mild brain injury, go home, rest, do nothing, do whatever. We did not get good care. The first doctor I saw was a neurologist, and he did not take my injury seriously. I've shared some of this story in other times, but we did not get good treatment. I did not get any treatment for what I should have gotten treatment for. And it was very, very long time ago, 2007, December. But after that, I had a lot of undiagnosed vestibular dysfunction. I finally did get treatments, but I kept falling and hitting my head over and over again. And this has led to over 12 diagnosed repeated concussions. And the weird thing about re-injuries, so I heard a statistic that I can't remember exactly what it is. I probably should have looked it up before this, but it's something like if you get one concussion, you're like 7 times more likely to get another one. Whether it's 7 or I'm remembering it wrong. Either way, you're a lot more likely to get another concussion if you have had one in the past. And so I've had so many concussions over the years, and I've had weird different experiences with different practitioners or doctors or to be treated in different ways. And I was basically told it's mild and you'll be fine, just rest and do nothing and it'll get better. And it got worse, not better. And so I kept starting to recover and do better. And I was able to move on in school with a lot of effort and accommodations. And then I would get another injury and setback. So a setback, when you get another injury, if it brings new symptoms, that means it's a new injury or symptoms you've not had for quite a long time. And I have had so many different things with my vision, my eyes not working together right. It was enough to make me feel horrible all the time, but not enough to be classified as like severe enough to, at the time, get me the right therapies. So, if you know my story from the previous episodes, you know that I finally was able to find the right treatment, and that's partly what motivates me to do this podcast. So, that being said, we are now going to move into talking about misconceptions. So, I think number one, we've already talked about a little bit, is that a mild traumatic brain injury or a mild concussion, a misconception is it means that it's going to have a mild effect on your life. But brain injuries are not salsa. A mild brain injury can have a devastating effect on your life. And I just think we should throw out those terms altogether because it means nothing and you get sent home with basically misinformation. Another misconception is that helmets can prevent concussions. Unfortunately, concussions are, see, I'm losing my words. I can't think of the word. It's an injury of force. So basically, it's like your brain bouncing inside of your skull. So a helmet cannot prevent your brain bouncing inside your skull from the force of some sort of impact or some sort of jolting movement. There's a word for it, and I cannot think of what that word is at this moment. A concussion is a injury that involves acceleration and deceleration. A concussion is, there is another word, I can't think of what it is, so we're just going to move forward from that. But basically, it's from movement. It's not from being like the actual impact. Your brain is on the inside of your skull. So your concussion, it's from a force. A brain injury is often an injury of force. Now, a helmet can prevent skull fractures or a more serious brain injury from a skull fracture or something like that. But helmets have never been shown to prevent concussions. Another misconception is that you have to hit your head to sustain a concussion. Unfortunately, that one is not true, and I am living proof of that. I have received multiple concussions without hitting my head. One time I slipped on the ice and I hit the side of my body so hard it jarred my brain and caused a concussion. Another time I slipped down the stairs, same thing. I landed on my butt really hard, and the quick deceleration of my brain and gravity, my head and gravity, caused my brain to bounce in my skull and give me a concussion. So it doesn't have to do with, you don't have to hit your head to get a concussion. This is very important in car accidents, falls as well, which, by the way, falls are the number one cause of traumatic brain injury. So I've had my TBIs and concussions mostly from falls, but a lot of people get them from car accidents. And a car accident, if you come to a stop, think about it. If you're going like however many miles per hour, like, I don't know, 40 miles per hour, let's say, you're driving, and that's not even like super fast, like some highway speeds. If you're driving highway speeds, like 60 or 70 even, and your car comes to a sudden stop, what is Newton's law? An object in motion stays in motion. And so your brain might stay in motion at that high miles per hour, and the car stops suddenly, and you might hit your head on your headrest. You might not hit your head, but your brain can be impacted by that. Again, I'm not a doctor. I should have put a disclaimer at the beginning. I'm not a doctor. I am a girl who's had over 12 diagnosed concussions, and I do brain injury support, and I'm on the board of directors for the Brain Injury Association of Pennsylvania, and I've been advocating for brain injury a very long time. I do consider myself a brain injury advocate. I do not consider myself a super expert, but I'm just trying to share things that I've learned over time. So, another myth is that you have to lose consciousness to have a concussion, and this is especially prevalent maybe in like parents with children. I was reading some I was reading some things before recording this, and I went on the website for Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is actually one of the places I was treated. I got some good help there eventually, but they have a thing that says if your child didn't lose consciousness, they don't have a concussion is a myth. Only 10 to 20% of children with concussions report being knocked out. So concussions can occur either way. Another misconception is that you need a brain imaging, MRI, or CAT scan to diagnose a concussion. Unfortunately, concussions cannot be seen on a CAT scan or an MRI. Concussions are a functional injury, not a structural injury. A CAT scan or MRI will show a brain bleed. It will show a more like a tumor or something a lot more significant, aneurysms even, but it will not show a concussion. That doesn't mean that it's not real. You got to think about where our technology is at. And while we have very advanced technology, an MRI or a CAT scan is a very crude image of a very, very complex and intricate brain. And so it's not going to show all of everything that's happening in the brain. It won't show a lot of the functional stuff. And so it's really important to know that just because you have a clean CAT scan doesn't mean that you have a clean bill of health. And a lot of people misequate the two. Another one that CHOP has on their website is that a kid should play through the pain. That's a myth. I would even equate that to going to any activities when you're in pain. Now, there is symptom limited activity, right? However, if you first sustain a concussion and you are pushing yourself to get back into a game or to get back to things really quickly, get back to work, and I understand you have to work, right? So that's very nuanced, and everything is different. But what CHOP's website says, you can delay recovery substantially or even cause longer term consequences by continuing to play. If you are pushing yourself way too hard, especially in the acute stage after a concussion, you could cause worse problems long term. So concussions are serious. I guess the final misconception to share is that it's just a concussion. It's not a big deal. No, concussions are very serious and they are needing to be addressed. You can't just wipe a concussion under the rug and think it's going to be fine. And that's something else that I was chatting with that mother this last weekend that I met, whose daughter just sustained a concussion. She's like, oh, well, will it just go away on its own? And maybe some concussions do, but based on the symptoms she was sharing with me, I was not sure. And of course, there's no way to really know. But typically, if you are presenting with a lot of symptoms, they will not just go away on their own. It's going to take some concerted effort and the right treatment and the right plan. So yeah, those are some misconceptions. Now, I want to talk about some concussion symptoms and why it's important to talk about that. Concussion symptoms. So on the Concussion Awareness Now website, Concussion Awareness Now is the BIAA's concussion awareness effort, which is pretty awesome. And they have a really interesting way to describe symptoms. They have two categories. Number one, symptoms to look for in yourself. And number two, symptoms to look for in others. This is from concussionawarenessnow.org. And I love that because it's so different to be able to be in your own head and to feel it versus looking for it in a family member or for someone else. So first, I'm going to talk about the symptoms to look for in yourself. Number one, they write headaches. Yeah, post-concussion headaches are real and they are horrible. I have experienced them. And this is a slight tangent, but I think it's worth saying that a post-concussion headache is not the same thing as a migraine or headaches that people without concussions will get. A lot of times, a neurology will treat post-concussion headaches with migraine medications and they end up not working please go back and listen to the episode with Dr. Thompson Maisaka, where it's all about headaches, post-injury headaches versus migraine, and the difference. Because there's a big misconception. Okay, I'm back into misconceptions, but there's a big misconception that a post-injury headache is the same thing as migraine, or they call it migraine, and it's really not. So, post-injury headaches could come from other sources. It could come from your eyes not working together. It could come from your neck or a whiplash injury. It could come from overstimulation, too much lights, too much noise, too much sound, too much going on. It could come from exhaustion and tiredness. Your brain might just have a shorter battery and you can't sustain as long of a day as you could before. So headaches after concussion could come from that. Now, another misconception is you have to have headaches to have a concussion. There are people that I have met that do not really get headaches, but they have all the other symptoms of concussion. And so I think it depends on your personal pain tolerance. It depends how you define headache. It depends on what you're used to. Maybe before, if you've had headaches before, maybe you're not going to recognize a post-concussion headache as much. So headaches are a symptom with caveats of it's different for everyone. And maybe that's another misconception I should have said before. Oh my gosh, I'm tripping over my words today. I'm sorry. I'm a little tired right now when I'm recording this, but I'm trying to get it out this week. So please bear with me as I trip over my words. My brain got a little sidetracked. What was I going to say? I was going to say another misconception. Okay, another misconception. I'll get back to it. I already said there was one that you had to have headaches to have a concussion, or another misconception is that a concussion is just a headache. And that's not the case. I think that's where I was going. So yeah, it's worth looking into. If you're having headaches after you've hit your head and you hadn't really had them before, you might have a concussion. But there are a lot of other things to think about with post-concussion headaches. Number 2, vision issues. Now, your vision may not work like it did before. Your eyes can even very subtly not move together. Now, there are more obvious things with vision where you might get double vision or blurry vision. But one of the common ones is your eyes just not focusing together. And that's what I had. And it's very, very nuanced and difficult. And when I first had my brain injury, it didn't really get treated. It was over 10 years after. And I think I had to wait for the research and technology to catch up with it. But now they can look at that. So if you feel like you're getting headaches, maybe it's from the vision. If your eyes just are kind of like sliding around, like I'll describe if I'm trying to look at my phone, like I'm out, like my eyes will just kind of like slide and it's hard to focus on things. Another one is nausea or vomiting. Now, this is normally an acute symptom of concussion. Right after you get a concussion, you might end up vomiting. You might end up having nausea. And so that's worth getting checked out. If you've hit your head and you throw up, please go to the emergency room or to urgent care. But concussions can also cause more long-term gut issues, which is something else we've addressed. So that can happen as well. And that can sometimes be related to dysautonomia. Concussions can cause dysautonomia, which is dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system. That's not on this list, but it's something that I had that went untreated. So that's worth looking into as well. And dysautonomia, you kind of get stuck in fight or flight mode. So you feel on edge all the time. And your body can't regulate between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. So you kind of like get stuck in fight or flight, but then you're not in the rest and digest. And so your gut gets all messed up too from that. That's a very simplified way to explain it. But another one is dizziness or off balance. That's a huge one to look into. If you feel dizzy, not necessarily even spinning. Some people get spinning. Some people just get lightheaded. If you feel dizzy, if you feel lightheaded, and if your balance is affected, your vestibular system could be having some issues from the concussion. And so that one's really important because it's dangerous because you can end up falling and getting another injury, which is no fun. Another one is exhaustion or fatigue. Man, that post-concussion fatigue hits like no other. It's cognitive fatigue. So it's the kind of fatigue and exhaustion that sleep does not fix. You can wake up tired. It's like I'll never understand how I wake up tired, but it happens. You could sleep for 8 hours and wake up tired, and not necessarily need sleep, but your brain is just like so exhausted. So that's worth looking into. Sensitivity to noise or light, or both. Getting overstimulated. That's very important. Very light sensitivity, struggling with screens, struggling with the sun, struggling with, I hate fluorescent lights. Why does every hospital have fluorescent lights? Like, what the heck? Especially in the brain injury unit. It's like you go to see a brain injury doctor and they have these horrible fluorescent lights that trigger light sensitivity. So I've learned to wear a hat every time I go because I cannot stand those lights. Some people, lights don't bother them, and they bother me to this day. And it's so funny. I was with my husband at his office this week, and I was sitting in his office, and he doesn't have a lamp in there. Now, I'm a lamp girly. I love lamps because I need them because I can't stand overhead lighting. And he just sits all day with a fluorescent light above his head in the ceiling. And I just cannot. I'm like, how do you live like this? But it doesn't affect him at all. He doesn't even think about the lights. I'm always thinking about lights. It's like just a natural part of my life now, but it never was before the brain injury, right? And so it kind of was like, oh, wow, some people don't think about fluorescent lights and don't hate them. Weird. So after a concussion, if you find yourself sensitive to light, that could be it. Now, personality changes or irritability. Now, they have them listed together. I would view them as separate symptoms. Personality changes, that's really important to look into because that means that there's something going on. If the person's sense of humor or social skills are not activating right, or they're like not getting things, or their emotional responses are not accurate to how they were before, they probably have some issues from a concussion. If you're finding yourself really irritated, struggling with your emotional responses, they have another one that says emotions out of whack. So we've been talking about that on Instagram, which, by the way, hang out with me on Hope After Head Injuries Instagram. I'm finally getting back to posting more. And this week has been all about posting about having no filter. And just like, I was surprised at how many people shared that based on last week's episode of this podcast where Kevin shared about not having a filter. And, so I think in emotional responses, and that's something a lot of us deal with. And so that's definitely one. They also have written down numbness or tingling, definitely worth looking into. Mental fog or concentration problems. I mean, that's kind of like classic concussion. That's kind of what I think even the general public maybe knows about. Like if you feel mentally fogged, if you're like not responding right, or you can't concentrate, can't focus, that's huge. Huge red flag that you've had a concussion. Clumsiness, which I would connect that with off balance, but like walking into things, proprioceptive issues, just like really struggling with dropping things, walking into things, anything like that, that's a sign of concussion. They also write changes to sleep, which that's a big one. Some people end up sleeping a lot more after their injury, and some people end up not being able to sleep. I fell in the insomnia category where my brain would not shut down to sleep. And so they put me on medication for that. And I was on that medication for 14 years. And I finally got off it. And now I take like an herbal supplement to help me sleep. And so I've never gone to sleep without taking something to help since my brain injury, maybe like 1 or 2 nights when I accidentally forgot it. So that's been weird for me. I have trouble with sleep, and I have the whole time. Some people have no problem with sleep and they end up sleeping a lot more, and their issue is waking up. So it's just worth looking into. There was another thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, hormones. This is not on the list, but for my ladies out there, if your cycle changes after you get a concussion and gets irregular, please look into that. Concussions can cause hormone changes. So yes, that's worth looking into. Men, we have an episode of the podcast about hormones and brain injury with Dr. Megan Kirschling. It's back a number of episodes. I can only speak from the female experience, but I will say if your cycle gets off, that could be a sign as well. Now, on concussion awareness, now they also talk about symptoms to look for in others. So if you are not the person yourself, it's kind of hard to be able to know, like, do they have a headache, or what's their mental state, or how are their eyes, because you're not the one experiencing it. So on the other side, it would be, they write loss of consciousness, even briefly. Of course, that's to look into. But remember, our misconception is that you need to lose consciousness to have a concussion. You do not. It's possible to have a concussion without losing consciousness. Slow to answer questions, slowed reaction time. Those are things you could notice in someone. Confusion, forgetfulness, personality changes or irritability. They write and more. I would add the clumsiness or walking into things or balance issues as well. Look for those things. And then they also have, for toddlers and infants, additional red flags include crying without being able to be consoled and refusing to nurse or eat. So that's worth looking into. I think another symptom that is not listed here is impulsivity. Like uncontrollably doing things, impulse control, like not being able to control your reactions. That's an annoying one. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. Now, here's a list of symptoms that require immediate care when to go to the ER. Loss of consciousness, extreme drowsiness, vomiting, seizures, severe headache that gets worse and will not go away, unable to recognize people or places or increasing confusion, numbness, slurred speech, blurred vision, weakness or decreased coordination, one pupil is larger than the other, unusual behavior, restlessness, agitation, neck pain, amnesia, or memory problems. It says and more. But those ones are a lot on the more severe side. And if you're listening to this and you have some of those on the more severe side, please, please, please get checked out. I think every concussion should get checked out. But some are, obviously there's a spectrum and a scale, and I can't say better or worse because it's like, I think every concussion is different, and I think every concussion needs to be addressed and treated. Now, statistically, most concussions do heal and the person recovers. I have two sisters who have both had concussions, and they have both gotten back to their lives and back to their function completely. Whereas me over here, I'm like concussion after concussion, after getting worse, after symptom, after symptom, after symptom, after symptom, after symptom. And so, in my family, we have both sides. We've had people who've had concussions and recovered. And then me, who's over here, like, started a podcast about them because I've lived most of my life with issues from brain injury. And so when you have a concussion, do not freak out. There is a chance you might recover and heal quickly, or it might take more time. It might take more work. But the brain has neuroplasticity. I know we talked about a lot of symptoms today. And if you're listening to this and you're like, me, I want to encourage you, there is hope. And please go back and listen to other episodes of this podcast. There's a lot of resources out there. I even recently did an episode with Dr. Brittany Charlet, who is called The Road to Concussion Recovery. Listen to that. Listen to a practitioner talk about how do we make concussions better, because there is hope, there is help, there is healing. We are not alone on this. So, all right. I think that's all I want to say today. I'm also very tired right now, so I hope it made sense. I'm going to go back and edit it and listen to it. But thank you guys so much for being here. We are having our Zoom support groups as usual. Every month we have Hope After Head Injury on a Tuesday night and Brain Injury Bible Study on one Saturday. I'd love to see you at one of those or both. Join me on Hope After Head Injury's Instagram, Facebook page, Facebook group. You're not alone, and share concussion awareness with the people around you. It is National Concussion Awareness Day, and it's an invisible injury that needs advocates. We need to share advocacy about concussions because you can't see it on the outside, and there are a lot of misconceptions. So thank you so much for listening, for being here. I'll see you guys next time. There's always hope. Bye. Thanks so much for tuning in to Hope Survives podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, and would love for you to consider leaving us a rating or a review. Check out hopeafterheadinjury.com for more. I'll see you next time. And remember, there's always hope.